tell me, when was the moment you decided to write this book, and how long did it take you to write about this past year?
First of all, I'm so excited to be sitting down with you and the GRIO. I have to tell you that this is my third book, so I'm an author. I think it's so important for us to tell our own story. And so I thought after I left that it would be important to give people an intimate, insider look into the White House, what it's like to go into the Oval Office or to sit into a cabinet meeting or to go into the Situation Room. I wanted people to understand the dysfunction of this current administration.
And you've talked about that widespread corruption that you witnessed, you had a front row seat to. Mm-hmm. What were some examples of the things that you saw, or the context for some of the things that made you feel uncomfortable?
Well, I can't go into the corruption aspect of it only because just hours before you and I sat down, I received letters from Donald Trump's legal team saying that he wanted to file some complaints against me. So I have to be very, very careful about what I say, but I can tell you that I'm not going to be silenced. He's not going to bully me, and I am going to tell my story.
Sarah Huckabee Sanders was in the press room and was asked about tapes where Donald Trump allegedly says the N-word, and she says she can't confirm or deny that those tapes exist. Do you have the White House scared right now?
First of all, it is a really sad day in America when we can't emphatically deny that the President of the United States used some type of racial slur. That's a very, very sad day in this country. And she said, I can't guarantee that. If someone had asked that question about Barack Obama, then there would be no question, oh, he never said anything derogatory about a person. But with Donald Trump, it's not so certain that he did. And to have him say the things that he said about me in the multiple tweets that he sent out today just lets you know, if he would call me a dog in public, what is he saying about me in private?
And I know that this is something that you've answered a lot today. The tweets calling you a lowlife and a dog, obviously very disrespectful. And it upset a lot of people because of, as an African-American woman, there's so many racial undertones to that. Overtones, really. It's not hidden. How did you react when you first heard those tweets? And did you ever think that he would go this low so quickly?
My first reaction was thinking about something that my grandmother used to say. It's not what they call you, it's what you answer to. And I answer to that of being a child of God. I do not answer to lowlife or dog, as he said. And so my reaction was that I was very, very sad and also concerned. And I think that all Americans should be concerned when the President of the United States is showing mental decline, lack of impulse control, and he's downright mean. I mean, he's just harassing and bullying me.
And that's something that you did mention in the book Unhinged, the sort of observation that he was declining mentally. Do you have examples of things that you saw that made you concerned about the president's mental state?
Yes, I was uniquely positioned in the front row of history. One, meeting him in 2003 for the first season of The Apprentice. Back then, he was really, really sharp. He was a brilliant negotiator, and he was able to go into complex ideas, and he was engaging. He had this vast vocabulary, an excellent communicator. Fast forward to going into the White House when I would try to brief him, and I would tell him, this is the points, these are the policies, this is the person we're meeting with. Let me give you an example. Black History last month, when he thought that Frederick Douglass was still alive. I mean, clearly I briefed him on the different issues, but anyone who still thinks Frederick Douglass is alive is either inept, ignorant, or, in this case, mentally impaired.
Did you cringe in that moment? What was the sort of chatter behind the scenes when that happened? Because obviously the press erupted and talked about it, but being on the inside, how did you react?
At the moment it came out of his mouth, I wanted to crawl underneath the table. One, because I knew the criticism I would get from the outside. What is Omarosa doing? Why isn't she briefing him? Why doesn't he know these things? Why hasn't she organized these events in a better way? I knew that I was going to take the brunt of the criticism for his ignorance.
You know, so we've followed the journey over the past year. We saw the work that you did around HBCUs, the effort to sort of bring CBC into the White House as well. And you've talked about why you felt it was important to be a part of this administration. You said if you don't have a seat at the table, you're on the menu.
Yes.
Did you accomplish what you set out to accomplish for the Black community, or what did you accomplish when you were in the White House?
I think that in some ways, I came up short. A lot of that was the animosity towards Donald Trump. I mean, people just genuinely were devastated that this racist was going to run our country. So no matter what efforts I put out, people didn't want to see that type of residual outreach, because I was bringing his stuff to a meeting with NABJ. I was bringing his stuff to NNPA. I was bringing his stuff when I went to NAN or whatever. People saw him when I showed up. And I didn't realize that when I was in the administration, but now I can see that so very clearly, where I would get frustrated because I would show up and people would boo and hiss and protest and downright just completely push back against my efforts to outreach. You know, I can certainly see why people didn't want me there, but nonetheless, I thought it was important for me to reach out. Now, there were things that I got accomplished that forever I'll be proud of. You know, the efforts and the outreach for famine in Africa, in Sudan, in Nigeria, places where people have no food and no hope. I was so glad to work with USDA to get almost $500 million for that efforts. Some of the funding that I was able to get for Flint, not enough, but what I could get. Year-round Pell Grants for historically black colleges and universities, which allowed HBCU students to go to summer school and to get out of school earlier. And then, of course, we had natural disasters, the hurricanes, Puerto Rico, you know, and being able to fight to make sure that Puerto Rico got what they needed. And they were very, very disrespectful towards Puerto Rico, but I was the only voice there pushing to make sure the same type of aid that we gave to Florida, we gave to Texas, that we would give to Puerto Rico. And, you know, I think now the fact that there is no one there, they have not in 7 months found another person to do that work. You know, Barack Obama had 15 people doing African American outreach during his administration. We have none. We are very resilient as African Americans. We have survived some of the most difficult periods in this country, and we'll survive Trump. But there's some really important things that we have to do to minimize the amount of damage that we suffer as a result of his policies.
Mm-hmm. So for a lot of the black community, we watched as the things sort of unfolded with the resignation, or when you left the White House. It was a little bit messy. There was a little bit of drama. And you did an interview where you said that Donald Trump was racial, but he wasn't racist. And now, obviously, you say he's a racist and he's a misogynist. Some people would say they always knew that. Why did it take you this amount of time to come to that conclusion?
You know, I had a complete blind spot with the person who I thought that I'd known for so long. After 14 years with a person, you tend to give them the benefit of the doubt. So when he explained to me that the birther movement had been started by Hillary and Bill Clinton, and that it was just a political maneuver to advance himself, it's not that I bought it, I just gave him the benefit of the doubt. I shouldn't have, but I did. And there were so many other issues that I took him to task for and he had an explanation for. I had completely submitted to this world that Donald Trump was not the worst person on the face of the earth, because I was too close to him to really see what he was doing. And in a lot of ways, I missed the mark in terms of having an opportunity to impact him a little more, because I was giving him the benefit of the doubt. And, you know, being a part of this administration, there were things that I sat through, and I would go to him and I would take him to task, but people in the community wouldn't know that. Mm-hmm. In fact, they thought that I was complicit with every single decision that he made, and that wasn't always the case. But because they didn't have that insight, that's why it was so important for me to write Unhinged. Right. So people could see what it was like day in and day out to fight for a community, to be a voice, to carry that on my shoulder, to, you know, have the battles at the table with most of the assistants to the presidents are white men, to get beat up at the table by most of these white men, and then to walk out and try to go into my community and get, you know, the pushback that I got. I didn't realize it until after I left the White House just how heavy of a burden that was.
When you listen to those tapes, you describe a feeling of shock and disgust listening to Donald Trump say the N-word. And in your interview with Chris Matthews, you mentioned that he was talking about Kwame Jackson, who was a former contestant on The Apprentice. Are you able to give any information about what the context was? Was he criticizing him? Was he making fun of him? What was the context, even if you can't tell us everything that was on the table?
Well, as you know, as I mentioned, I'm now kind of in a legal situation with Donald Trump over exactly this discussion. But in the same way that we were shocked by the things that he said during that Access Hollywood tape, where we would never have imagined that he would talk about basically assaulting women and how easy it was for him to just walk up and do whatever he wanted with women. The same way that rolled off of his tongue is the same way these comments rolled off his tongue when he was saying these very derogatory things. And so it's pretty shocking to discover the person that you thought was a friend, a mentor, and somebody to be aspirational towards was actually this horrible, horrible person. And I'm so glad that I have this opportunity to speak up and to blow the whistle on a lot of the corruption that's there and to give people some idea exactly what this journey has been like.
There are people who celebrate the fact that you got these receipts while you were in the White House because, as you said, some of these stories people wouldn't believe unless they literally heard it on tape.
Would you believe that I would be locked up in the basement of the White House, in the most secure room in the country, the Situation Room, and have a 4-star general, someone who's known for going into battle and fighting enemies and being a killer, would look at me and say that things can get ugly for you. Let's hope that there won't be any damage to your reputation, or threaten me with a court-martial. If I didn't have the tapes, it'd be very difficult for anyone to believe that.
Right.
But when you hear it, you can understand just what it was like to be in that room. Mm-hmm. And I was just hoping I'd come out of the room safely without them accusing me of maybe attacking them, because you heard these really dramatic stories that I was drugged out of the White House or I was running around setting alarms. Without that tape, people would still believe that I behaved that way.
And so did you not trust the people that you were working with by choosing to record? Did you go in having that sense that you couldn't trust them?
Well, first of all, it was really bizarre to be asked into the Situation Room at 5:30, 6 o'clock at night by myself. That was bizarre. And so my instincts kind of flagged, and I knew that I'd have to be prepared to protect myself. The moment he walked in and kicked my assistant out, so now it's just me in there.
Right.
I knew that I had to protect myself.
Yeah. There are people who celebrate the fact that you have these receipts and that you're able to tell your story. There are others who feel betrayed by the fact that you took this position in the first place with Donald Trump. What would you say to the Black community, although we, again, are not a monolith, everybody thinks differently, to people who feel betrayed that you took this position in the first place?
Well, I'd like to give him a little historical perspective. And let me just say, before I say his name, I'm not in any way comparing myself to Martin Luther King. But had Martin Luther King not gone and sat down with LBJ, we would not have had the Civil Rights Act. And there were people even back then that said, look at him cozying up with those white folks. He doesn't care about that. That president hates us. Had he not gone to sit down and have the conversation, there's no way we would have that Civil Rights Act. You have to be in the room to impact the policy and the change that we want to see. We can't just sit back and ignore Donald Trump for the next couple of years. Somehow, some way, we have to have an emissary who's willing to go into the lion's den and fight the good fight for our people. It's a fight that's worth fighting. I'm talking about educational funding for our children. Betsy DeVos went to New York City to do a tour, and she didn't even have the respect to stop by one of the public schools. She only went to a private school. That's dangerous. We have Jeff Sessions rolling back all of our civil rights protections at Justice Department, right? And even at Department of Commerce, we have someone who's accused of all types of scandals and fraud, who's running our Department of Commerce, which actually houses our Small Business Administration, which provides millions and millions of dollars of loan for small businesses throughout the country. We cannot just take a 2-year hiatus from political engagement. We can't. And historically, the people who have made change have gone in uncomfortable situations and made uncomfortable, unpopular decisions that we have all benefited from. In fact, affirmative action also came during a Republican administration. And so if we look at historic precedent, it will inform us that we cannot just take a pass during the next 3 years.
Do you plan to run for office?
I have run for office.
Would you run for senator, congresswoman, president?
My first run was the most important run. I ran for school board in Los Angeles. I ran to represent our children and to impact educational change. And I think that that process informed me that, yes, we have to be politically engaged. And if an opportunity comes for me to serve in my community, whether that's appointed or an elected position, I will step up every single time, even when it's not popular, and even when people criticize me, because the call to service is a very difficult one where you can be criticized or cheered all in the same day. But I know that it's worth the sacrifice.